The GoPro Hero 10 is the best action camera GoPro has ever released. There is no doubt about that. But has it become exactly the action camera we've been asking for years? Has GoPro finally been able to solve all the problems of past models, and is this now the perfect action camera? Not necessarily. But let me explain. I've taken hundreds of shots with the GoPro Hero 10 over the last 3 months, and if you've been following this channel for some time, you've seen that I've done several comparison tests with other cameras. And I can tell you right away that I like this GoPro camera. So no matter what I'm going to say in this video, the GoPro Hero 10 is a great camera, and especially if you want to take action shots, it's a great choice. However, there are still some things I don't like about it, and to make this review a little more interesting, today I'm going to tell you 5 things I don't like about the Hero 10 and 5 things I like about it, and in ascending order of importance. So I will mention the best and worst properties of the GoPro Hero 10 at the end. Alright, let's start with an issue that came up negatively in several tests of the Hero 10. Overheating. Yes, it's true, the Hero 10 overheats significantly faster than the GoPro Hero 9. I did several tests a few weeks ago, and especially at high frame rates and in 5K, it shut down significantly faster than the Hero 9. In 5K 30 for example, it shut down after 38 minutes, while the Hero 9 lasted more than 50 minutes. In 4K 60 according to my last test, the Hero 10 does 29 minutes, and in 4K 120 only 20 minutes. In 4K 24 for example, it has no problems and can easily shoot for over an hour. All recordings were taken at normal room temperatures of around 23 degrees Celsius. In summer, the recording time could be considerably shorter. Whether these figures are a problem for you depends of course on what you want to shoot with the GoPro Hero 10. If you want to use it in summer to capture an entire football match in 5K, preferably in 5K 60, then overheating will definitely be a problem. Personally, I deliberately put this topic at the beginning, because overheating is usually not a problem for me, not even in summer. I usually shoot my videos in 5K or 4K, but I almost exclusively take short clips of 20 or 30 seconds, which I then use for a larger project. And besides that, when I compared it to DJI's Action 2, we saw that the GoPro Hero 10 still does much better than the competition when it comes to overheating. In fact, I personally have more problems with the cold than with overheating. But that is of course because I live in the mountains. Let's move on to a very positive aspect of the GoPro Hero 10. GoPro has finally released a camera that runs very stable right from the beginning. During all my tests and comparisons, and there were a lot of them, there was never a real crash. It was never necessary to remove the battery or to force a restart. Unfortunately, I have to say that this is new for GoPro, as past GoPros like the Hero 9 have needed several firmware updates to finally run stable. I would prefer to put this at the top of the list, because stability is actually an indispensable feature for an action camera. When I'm parachuting out of a plane or when I'm standing on a mountain and skiing down, the camera has to work, and it has to work reliably. Then I don't want to have to fiddle around and hope that I can get the crashed camera to work again. Nevertheless, this point is only in my 5th place today, because actually every new camera should work reliably. That should be a matter of course, but unfortunately it hasn't always been the case in recent years. Earlier I said that although I mentioned the overheating, it doesn't really bother me personally. What does bother me however are the new skin tones on the Hero 10. Compared to the Hero 9, the Hero 10's recordings have much more contrast. Details are emphasized more. Unfortunately, this also applies to the skin tones. I usually prefer a natural look, and I'm not a fan of cameras applying an unnatural beauty filter to skin tones. Unfortunately, the extremely high contrast look of the Hero 10 is perhaps a little too much for my skin. Impurities come out clearly and you immediately look a few years older. If you're 20 now, you might not care, but at my age it's a disadvantage. While the skin tones on the Hero 10 were not a step forward for me, GoPro has finally managed to make improvements in low light. If you've seen my detailed comparison test with the Hero 9, you may have come to a different conclusion. I didn't realize at first that the improvements in low light were not visible in 5K, but were mainly limited to 4K. In fact, you can see significant improvements in low light in 4K compared to the Hero 9. I actually didn't expect that, and it was therefore a very positive surprise. Shots with higher ISO values, for example with a value of 800, clearly have less noise and are therefore quite usable in contrast to the Hero 9. Earlier I said that the Hero 9 is one of the most stable new GoPros I have ever owned. Nevertheless, even this GoPro has not come out without software flaws. For example, I noticed a faulty battery level display on my GoPro, especially when I was charging the battery. The display often showed the same level, even though I had charged the battery for a longer period of time. At first I thought the battery was not charging at all. Only after switching it on and off several times did the battery display display update to the new real level. In addition, the Hero 10 did not initially support 24 frames per second in 5.3K or the max lens mod. Both were added with a firmware update, but the firmware is still in a beta stage. 24 frames per second would be an absolute must for me if I lived in the US. As a European, this was not so important to me as I used the camera in PAL mode, and 25 frames per second were strangely available from the very beginning. One still has the impression that GoPro releases cameras with unfinished software. At least this time I have to say that the software was 95% finished when it was released, and that other companies like Apple also often add features later on. What is immediately noticeable is that the GoPro Hero 10 is much more responsive than the Hero 9. The power of the new image processor is clearly noticeable. The camera changes modes much faster, switches on faster, starts recording faster, and simply reacts faster. With the Hero 9 it seemed that the processor was simply too weak for the high resolution of 5K, the incredible stabilization and the many features. That is no longer the case. The display still can't be compared to that of a good smartphone, but it is much more responsive and the camera simply runs much more smoothly now. So now we come to a point that has been bothering me about the GoPro since last year. Personally, I think that an action camera should become smaller and lighter with every innovation step. You should feel it as little as possible on your helmet or on a pole. GoPro has tended to do the opposite in recent years. The Hero 9 was bigger and clearly heavier than the GoPro Hero 8. The Hero 10 is now identically the same size as the Hero 9 and it basically weighs almost the same too. So there has been no progress at all in weight and size in 2 years compared to the Hero 8. The competition has recently shown that it can be done differently. Of course, I have to add here that smaller would probably also mean more problems with overheating. Of course, you shouldn't forget that. Image quality on the other hand has always been one of the great strengths of a GoPro, and it still is, and GoPro has worked continuously to improve it. The Hero 10 also has a slightly improved image quality compared to the GoPro Hero 9. The image is richer in contrast, for example in the clouds you can now see more details. Even the shadows are a little brighter and contain more details. GoPro has also added a new, more neutral color profile. Natural. Natural has quickly become my preferred color profile on the GoPro Hero 10. The neutral look is a good starting point for color grading, because as I've said many times before, I'm not a big fan of the flat color profile. Before we take a look at the Hero 10's biggest strength and weakness, I would like to point out a few other strengths and weaknesses that didn't make it into my top 5 today, but are definitely important. The GoPro Hero 10 has many great qualities for an action camera, including the huge ecosystem of mounts and accessories that allow you to use a GoPro in every conceivable situation. Of course, the Hero 10 has fantastic electronic stabilization, and my tests have shown that the stabilization has become even better this year. The Hero 10 is very easy to use and the touch display has also been improved. Although it's still not perfect in my opinion. The Hero 10 is waterproof to a depth of 10 meters without an additional housing. And that doesn't seem to be a matter of course either, as the competition recently proved. In my opinion, however, this is extremely important for an action camera. In my opinion, the price is also fair for what you get, and the audio quality is not excellent, but it is okay for a waterproof camera. And not to forget the many setting options. Everyone can adjust the settings to their own particular needs. By the way, you can find links to current offers for the Hero 10 and my favorite mounts and accessories in the video description. These are all important positive properties, but most of them also apply to older GoPros like the Hero 9 or Hero 8 and are not necessarily a compelling reason to buy the Hero 10. What is not so great, however, is the battery life. This could definitely be better. The new Enduro battery, which is now sold as an accessory and promises longer battery life and more power, should actually have been standard. The back display still has thick unsightly bezels and the digital sharpness of the footage has not been reduced compared to the Hero 9, but increased again. It is more important than ever to reduce the sharpness in the settings. But now it's time to talk about the biggest problem with the GoPro Hero 10. This issue is with the GoPro Hero camera as a product in general. Because my biggest problem with the GoPro Hero 10 is the lack of innovation. Yes, it's true, GoPro has been introducing minor innovations over the last few years. There have been various mods, for example the quite interesting Max Lens mod. They added the front screen last year, although that became necessary simply because DJI put a front screen on the first Osmo Action. But basically every year we get a slightly improved version of the same camera product. Real innovations have been absent in recent years. This is especially noticeable because DJI and also Insta360 are putting more and more pressure on GoPro with interesting concepts. The new magnetic mount system of the Action 2, for example, is ingenious, and the modular system, which was actually introduced by Insta360, is a very interesting approach. With GoPro, on the other hand, one has the impression that they are now foregoing major innovations. Past attempts such as the GoPro Session, the Karma drone or the Karma gimbal have all failed commercially. They are now probably trying to get the most out of the existing product, the GoPro Hero camera, and avoid major cost-intensive risks. However, there has been one important innovation with the GoPro Hero 10, and for me this is the Hero 10's greatest strength, especially in comparison to older GoPros, and that is the introduction of higher frame rates. With the Hero 10 you can shoot in 4K at 120 frames per second and get great, very high quality slow motion shots. And the 4K image is a very high quality image. It has no crop and is almost indistinguishable from 4K footage shot at a normal frame rate. This is a valuable feature, especially for an action camera. Great slow motion shots are extremely important when shooting sports, for example. With 120 frames per second, a slow motion of up to 20% is possible. This cannot be compared to 4K 60, where only a slow motion of 40% is possible. Apart from that, the Hero 10 can now also shoot 5K at 60 frames per second and 2.7K at 240 frames per second. However, with these recordings in 2.7K, the image quality is considerably reduced. For this reason, the 4K at 120 frames per second is by far the most important improvement on the Hero 10 for me, and one of the few real reasons to upgrade from the Hero 9. Okay, that was my very personal take on the GoPro Hero 10. What is your opinion of the Hero 10? Battery life or overheating might have a completely different meaning for you. Maybe I forgot something that is very important to you personally. Just write me in the comments. And give me a like as feedback if the video was interesting for you. There will be more videos about the Hero 10, so stay tuned and see you next time.